gold rush, the Frenchman had worked as an agricultural technician in the south of Brazil. Now, having found nothing, he was trapped in the forests of Roraima, hundreds of miles from the nearest town, as destitute as the others. Here was a man who had leapt over the edge, who had abandoned comfort and certainty for a life of violent insecurity. His chances of coming out alive, solvent and healthy were slight, but I was not convinced that he had made the wrong choice. I cleaned my teeth, picked up my notebook, then stepped out over the mud and gravel. The temperature was rising, and in the surrounding forest the racket of yelps and whistles and trills was dying away. It was now 3 weeks since Barbara, the Canadian woman with whom I was working, had found a way through the police cordon at Boa Vista Airport and had shoved us, unrecorded, onto a flight to the mines. It felt like months. We had watched the miners tearing out the veins of the forest, the river valleys whose sediments were paved with gold. We had seen evidence of the one-sided war some of them were waging against the local Yanomami people, and the physical and cultural collapse of the communities they had invaded. We had heard the gunfire that came from the woods every night as bandits waylaid the miners, thieves were executed, or men who had struck lucky fought over the gold they had found. In the 6 months since the main rush began here, 1,700 of the 40,000 miners had been shot dead. 15% of the Yanomami had died of disease. Now, because of the international scandal the invasion had caused, the new Brazilian government was clearing the mines and moving the miners into enclaves in other parts of the Yanomami's land. From there they knew they could re-invade their old claims as soon as the rest of the world lost interest. The federal police had cut the supply lines, no planes had landed on the dirt airstrips for several days. The miners were using the last of their diesel and preparing to move. The police were supposed to have arrived the previous day to confiscate weapons in advance of the expulsions, and the men had spent the morning moving in and out of the forest, burying their guns in plastic sheeting. I'd stayed to watch, but the police had not come. Barbara had... Jesus, where the hell was Barbara? She had set off yesterday to find a Yanomami village in the mountains and said she would be back that night, but no one had seen her. I cast around through the shanties and bars the miners had erected among the groups of men in the bottom of the pits without success. I found my friend Paulo, a mechanic who had defended the indigenous people in arguments with the other miners, and we struck up the valley to look for her. The river ran orange and dead, choked by the forest clay disturbed by the mines. Around it the valley was a wasteland of pits, spoil heaps and toppled trees. The miners who worked a stake called Junior Blefe told us that Barbara had passed through the previous day, but had not returned. A man with a drinker's face and a black eye knew how to find the village and agreed to guide us. We set off, running, into the mountains. Soon after we entered the darkness of the forest, we began to find the prints of Barbara's plimsolls, a day old, overlain by the naked tracks of the Yanomami. I kept my eyes on the ground, but every so often Paulo would stop and shout, "Look at that water! Look at those trees! So beautiful! Isn't that beautiful?" I would stand and gaze for a moment, and see trees weighed down above clear water by moss and epiphytes, damselflies pausing in spots of light. We ran on, following Barbara's footprints, slipping on the clay path. By midday we started to climb steeply. My breath came as if drawn through a sheet. Soon I saw light ahead of us. We were reaching the top of a mountain. From its crest we saw women on the far side of the valley, dressed only in loincloths, moving through banana groves, each carrying baskets of fruit. Hills stepped away into silence, forested, undisturbed. We remained hidden among the trees for a few minutes. Then we walked down to the lap of the valley and up into the gardens, calling out in Portuguese that we were friends. They stood still and watched us come close. I put out my hands and they shook them with shy grins. "White woman," I said, "have you seen the white woman?" I mimed Barbara's height and long hair. They laughed and pointed up the slope behind them into the forest. We began to run again over the mountain and down into the next valley. We stumbled exhausted along the valley floor, tripping on roots, blundering into trees.